Now I have to take off my boots to get on an airplane. Took them off this morning to get on the airplane. You know, not long after I left my job in the White House, my wife Tipper and I were driving from our home in Nashville, Tennessee, to a little farm we have 50 miles to the east, driving ourselves. I know that sounds like a little thing to most of you. You may have heard of phantom limb pain. I looked in the rearview mirror and all of a sudden it just hit me. There was no motorcade back there. This was a rented Ford Taurus. But it was dinner time and we got off the interstate looking for a place to eat. And we found a Shoney's restaurant, low-cost family restaurant chain. We walked in, sat down at the booth, and the waitress came over and made a big commotion over Tipper. And she took our order, and next day, true story, continuing the true story, the very next day I got on a plane and flew to Africa, to the nation of Nigeria, and gave a speech on energy policy in the city of Lagos. And I began my speech by telling that story that had just happened the day before, and I told it pretty much the same way I just shared it with you. Tipper and I were driving ourselves, Shoney's low-cost family restaurant chain. What the man said. They laughed, and I went ahead and gave my speech, and then I went back to the airport to fly back to the U.S., and I fell asleep on the plane until the middle of the night we landed on the Azores Islands for refueling. And they opened the door to the plane, and I walked out on the platform to get some fresh air. And I looked up, and to my surprise, here was a man waving a piece of paper and running toward the plane, yelling, "Call Washington! Call Washington!" And I thought, middle of the night, middle of the Atlantic Ocean, what in the world could be wrong in Washington? Then I remembered it could be a bunch of things. And what it turned out to be was that one of the wire service reporters in Nigeria had already written a story about my speech there, and my staff was very concerned because it had been printed all over the United States of America. I must have 100 copies of this story. My staff was concerned because it began this way. Former Vice President Al Gore announced in Nigeria yesterday, quote, "My wife Tipper and I have opened a low-cost family restaurant named Shoney's, and we're running it ourselves." Before I could get back to the U.S., David Letterman and Jay Leno had already had a field day with this. One of them had me in a big white chef's hat. Tipper was taking notes and yelling at me, "One more burger with fries!" 3 days later, I got a nice, long, handwritten letter from my friend and partner, Bill Clinton, saying, "Congratulations on the new restaurant, Al." We like to celebrate each other's successes. I think that the Kyoto brand, if you will, the name, the impression that has been created around Kyoto is itself an obstacle for some people who are in political life and who would otherwise be in favor of it. And you know, I understand that. I'm strongly in favor of ratifying it. I helped to negotiate it. I think that it's, you know, a first step. We have to have reductions that are much tougher than what are in Kyoto, and we will. But what I'm calling for, you know, the Kyoto Treaty expires in 2012, and the world is supposed to have negotiated a follow-on treaty by then. I think we ought to move that date forward by at least 2 years and set a new deadline to have the U.S. be a part of the new one if it will not ratify Kyoto. But that would give, my wife and I were leaving a baseball stadium with our youngest child, and we were going toward the parking lot, and he pulled free from his friend, ran across the street, and his hand pulled out of mine. He was 6 years old at the time, chased his friend. And he was hit by a car. It was a horrible, every parent's nightmare. Again, he had a happy ending, made a full recovery. But for a month, we were in the hospital, starting in the intensive care unit. We didn't know if he would live or die. And it was so devastating. As human beings, we are naturally protected against thinking thoughts that are unbearable. And the idea of losing what's something so precious that we just don't even contemplate it. I was forced to come face to face with that. If I could go back in time, I would go back to that moment when I first felt his hand slipping from mine and I would hold on. Can't go back in time. But I went forward from that event and I changed all my priorities. And in my professional life, the climate crisis became my main focus. And it took me 15 years before I found the words to describe what had changed. 15 years. A lot of times we do things that we don't put them into words, can't.